place.
Yeah, 87, I'd already left Jacksonville, gone to Atlanta, Atlanta back to Jacksonville, Jacksonville to New Orleans, New Orleans to Washington, D.C., D.C. back to Jacksonville to Detroit. I mean, that's what I did. So, yeah.
Now, what did you do in Atlanta?
Radio news.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I did the radio news, and I've been doing. My background is as a journalist. I am a writer.
Right.
I am a producer, and so I have as a news anchor, I have a couple of local Emmys, regional Emmys, to my credit, as well as documentaries which I produced and co-produced for public broadcasting system, local in Detroit.
Interesting.
So yeah, I'm a TV person.
You've got that booming voice, and I tell people, I say, one take Ben. Okay, camera on and boom, quote, got it. Okay, here with Ben Frazier today of the Northside Coalition. Mr. Frazier, if you could just give me a count to 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Awesome. Okay, let's get started. Tell me a little bit about how you got started with this brand of activism, how this became something of interest to you.
Well, actually, I started out maybe about 12 years old here in Jacksonville. My mother was a civil rights activist, a supporter of Rutledge Pearson, who was the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. of Jacksonville, Florida. She went to a church called St. Stephen's AME Church, and many of the early meetings of the NAACP were held there. That was our local church, St. Stephen's AME Church at 5th and Davis. So she would participate in the early marches, trying to desegregate public accommodation here in Jacksonville, Florida. I remember candidly holding her hand in front of Morrison's cafeteria, where black folks could work, but they could not eat. I remember the Ku Klux Klan passing by in an open bed truck in full regalia and being afraid and holding my mother's hand and looking up to her, telling her that I was afraid. And she said, "Benny, boy, don't you be scared. They ain't gonna do nothing." And I did not know then that I would be where I am now as a civil rights activist, but that was the groundwork. That was where it started for me. My dad told my mom not to participate in those marches, not to support Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She did anyway. She would come to the marches, and he did not know that. And in addition to that, she would take me with her. So that is where it began. My activism started with my mother, Estella Frazier, who was a foot soldier in the civil rights movement here in Jacksonville, Florida. Here in Jacksonville, Jacksonville has a very interesting body politic, especially if you consider its past. Its past has to do with the old boys club in terms of political corruption, in terms of this rather gender-specific political outlook. That was Jacksonville's past. A sleepy southern town, Live Oak, Spanish Moss, a city who didn't really know what it wanted to be, didn't define its personality, but we knew it was an old boys club. We knew that much. Black folks were kind of like put up with, they didn't put us down, but they simply talked at us, but not with us. So that the body politic of Jacksonville to me is very interesting in terms of the ministerial alliances that form the substantial part of the black body politic. So that's where we are now. We have advanced. There are obviously black political officials, more than just one or two tokens. There are now substantial involvement on the part of blacks in local politics, and even obviously at the national level as well. So it's changed. However, it's the best of times and the worst of times. There have been substantial changes, but it's also remained the same. There are still many disparities, if you will, socially and more precisely economically. Blacks are still left out, still underserved, still marginalized in terms of the socioeconomic perspective here right now. I look, for example, at one of the main thoroughfares in Jacksonville, say between Lem Turner and US 1 on Sutel, which is in the northwest quadrant. You see a few beauty shops, barber shops, churches, but for the most part, it looks like a ghost town in terms of multi-use real estate. No condos, no sit-down restaurants. It's vacant. Go to Blanding, and in a one-block area, you see more businesses than you see throughout the entire northwest quadrant. It is appalling. That there has been redlining is not a question. The only question is, what are we going to do about it? And unfortunately, not nearly enough has been addressed in terms of a renaissance of redevelopment and revitalization, which is entirely necessary in various zip codes, like the east side of Jacksonville, 32206, about 17,000 people, and half of them in some 10-block census areas are living below federal poverty guidelines. The same thing is true for zip code 32209, where there are 34,000 people, most of them renters, maybe out of 34,000 people, 600 whites. It's kind of like South Africa, the predominantly black area. But again, economically, we are experiencing severe disparities. It is exceptionally disproportionate in terms of the lack of black businesses. Then go to zip code 32208. Examine the demographics there, and you'll see the same thing. There are disparities, and it is so disproportionate that it's just appalling is not the right word for it. Disappointing and disgusting probably covers it a lot better.
Let's talk a little bit about the monuments. I know that you don't support keeping the Confederate monuments up, but there was a commission that came out recently with a point of view that said, well, some of these should be kept up in context. What are your thoughts in general about the monuments? Are there any that should be saved, left up, all taken down? What's the best way to handle the issue of the monuments and the school name changes?
Well, I think that as the monuments are concerned, we need first to understand the historical context, because the monuments, you see, are not Civil War monuments. They are, in fact, Jim Crow monuments. So let's examine that for a moment. When were the monuments erected? The Civil War began in 1860. The first shots fired at Fort Sumter. The war was over in 1865. You would think that that was when these Civil War monuments were erected. Wrong. They were not. So they're not Civil War monuments. They were, in fact, installed and erected starting in about 1810. So let's examine that period of time. The Civil War ended in 1865. 12 years of Reconstruction ended in 1877. And 1877 to 1910 was the apex of lynchings in the American South. And that was the period of black codes, they called them. the Jim Crow laws were instituted by legislatures and governmental bodies starting at about 1877 to 1910. In other words, black folks were being lynched left and right. This was also the period of what they called the white riots, that where black populations and neighborhoods and communities were routinely victimized by whites. That is a period of time that America has turned its head and looked the other way at. But imagine all the lynchings that were taking place. So that is when these monuments were erected. They were erected to let black folks know that white folks are still in charge. These are not Civil War monuments erected to the bravery and courage of people who fought for one side or the other. They're just not. They are monuments to Jim Crow and racial violence and terrorism. It's when the Ku Klux Klan was born. So we are not fighting a war or a battle against metal, marble, brass, or stone. We are fighting this battle against what these monuments stand for. These monuments stand for people who fought a civil war to promote the myth of white supremacy, who sought to perpetuate slavery, which is to say, these names embody men who sought to keep my people in chains. Now, clearly, if you are for justice and fair play, you won't agree to that. Why would you force our children to go to school with a school named in honor of a man who sought to keep me in chains? Their ancestors in chains, who said that slavery was ordained by God. People should not be honored with names on public schools and public places and spaces and public property, who felt that black people were inferior to whites simply because of the color of their skin. I suggest that it is now time to stop fighting the Civil War. Let's call it like it is. The only way that you can challenge the ideology of white supremacy as these monuments are concerned is to remove them, not to put up a plaque and try to explain it away. We know why they were erected. They were erected for the wrong purpose, in a wrong era. They embody the socio-economic tenor of that era, and it was simply wrong. Why don't we just walk away from it and simply move on?
That's awesome. All right, good. We're going to change the camera angle.
Some people think the statue should be left alone. Some people feel like the statues and the monuments should be removed. But that's a rather narrow argument. This argument should not be centered on the virtues or failures of Robert E. Lee. That is not what this is about. This is about why were they erected to begin with. And that is why we stand against these Confederate names, these monuments, these symbols, because of what they represent. Mayor Curry's move to remove the Confederate monument at Hemmings Park was a good thing. We'll give him credit for that. But as in the case of many politicians, they tend to demur the use of words like credibility and accountability. And we must hold him to that standard. He should not sit on the fence. He should not be indecisive. He should move with all deliberate speed to follow through on his commitment to his word. And his word is that he would remove all of them. The mayor should simply stand by his word. His word should be his bond, and we should go on. I have said on more than one occasion that it is time for Jacksonville to move into the sunlight of a brand new day. Jacksonville should leave its Civil War history behind. It's time for us to move forward into the sunlight of a brand new day.
What's happening today in totality, is it helping with race relations?
America, particularly since George Floyd, is going through its own period of reckoning. We're going through a period of growth. Growth is sometimes painful. The truth is sometimes painful. We recognize now, as we did after many years of slavery, that slavery was wrong, that social and racial and economic injustice is wrong. So I understand it's a little painful, and it's going to be more painful for some than others. If things are going good for you right now, and you're there in the status quo, you don't want to see anything changed. But if it's not going good for you right now, you do want to see change. What the creed says is liberty and justice for all. And until we achieve that, we must go ahead and hold the mirror to our faces and stand up correctly with strong necks and backs and face our own reality. This is a time of reckoning for us all. We understand it may be a little uneasy, but it is in that particular moment of ill at ease and that moment of feeling just a little bit uncomfortable that there's room for growth. We're still dealing with differences in terms of black folks and white folks and poor folks and not so poor folks. We just need to face that reality. We must become a city and a nation that is too busy to hate. It's time for us to move forward. We think they're progressive. For example, we push for pedestrian safety. We're probably the leading organization in Jacksonville that has historically for 4 years pushed for pedestrian safety. Jacksonville is like, I think, number 6 in terms of national cities that have pedestrian deaths. We don't think that nearly enough is being done to look out for pedestrians, including bicyclists. And there's been nothing happening on the local scene to address this major issue by way of the city council. That is not a black issue or a white issue. That's just a people issue. So we are a people-oriented organization. We are a people-oriented organization, and we are a solution-oriented organization. Yeah, we do believe in agitation. Yeah, we believe in the power of rhetoric, but we also are a solution-oriented organization. We're looking for answers to the troubling issues, problems, and challenges confronting this city.
Good, good. Now, you're getting a lot done. How are you funded? And do you have the funding that you feel you need?
It's funny that you should ask. We received a few small grants, nothing large. The nonprofit center in Jacksonville gave us our strengths and weaknesses, and they said, well, you got 2 problems. Ben, you need to have a better plan for succession. In other words, what happens if something happens to you? I said, okay. They said, the other part is, this organization seems to be funded from out of your pocket. You got to do better than that. I said, you're right there too.
What else would you like to add?
There isn't much more I want to add except to say that I think what the answer here to the problems confronting this country, this state and this city, is our love for a fellow man, for there to be truth, justice, and liberty for all. We just got to care about each other a little bit more. We got to listen to each other a little bit more. I don't expect that we'll ever sit down around a campfire and sing Kumbaya, but we ought to try to move in that direction.